even the city, even the city has adopted, the newspaper, the city has adopted this framing, this language framing. Words matter a lot. And the framing of crisis is part and parcel of Eric Adams' attempts to use his emergency powers to skirt the law, to stay out of reach of city council on certain matters. And the moniker migrant is an incredibly powerful othering device. And it's just not true to this population of persons. By that logic, by the migrant logic, these folks are still in transit, perhaps not here permanently, not the city's responsibility as an ongoing member of our city's fabric. Migrants do exist, traveling for seasonal work, for example. That does not properly describe the tens of thousands who've made the enormously difficult and often extremely traumatizing trips from their home countries to be with us here in the city today. These are immigrants, and they are best understood as a part of this city's long, albeit very complicated, history of immigration. And efforts to describe them otherwise, I think, should be understood as efforts to hold them outside, to other them, to prevent the city from having to take responsibility for them. So throughout this presentation, I will be using terminology such as new immigrant or recent immigrant, because it also matters when they arrived for the sorts of services and accommodations that they have access to. So that new or recent immigrant will distinguish those who are most at risk under the Adams administration system of housing and benefits application. So we're going to talk about this later, but the date that matters in that respect is whether they've arrived before or after March 15th of 2022. This is our best effort at a person-first framing that also, we think, works against the city's political narrative and framing. If others in this group have other suggestions for person-first language, we would really love to hear them and to talk about them at the end. Okay, that out of the way, let's get into it. Okay, so here is a very top-level view of the public shelter system in New York City. DHS, Department of Homeless Services, is probably what you think of when you think of shelter. They provide a variety of types of shelter, but they're not the only providers of shelter in the city. Department of Youth and Community Development provides shelter for runaway and homeless youth, where the max age for housing placement is 21 years. The max age for drop-in centers is 24 years. HPD, which will come back around, they historically provided shelter for those homeless due to kind of natural disasters or city vacate orders. HRA, Human Resource Administration, who also manages public benefits, SNAP, Medicaid, cash assistance, they provide shelter for DV, for survivors of domestic violence. And then the HERCs and the respite centers listed at the bottom are the Adams administration new emergency shelters that have been put into place in recent years to handle the arrivals of mass numbers of immigrants. And we will discuss each of these more, or many of these more in detail. So now DHS.
Sorry, Graham.
Please.
Sorry, I forgot to mention, if you have questions, please just post them in the chat. We will be going over them at the very end.
And I realize I'm speaking rather fast. Nancy, are we translating?
No, not at the moment. I'll chime in.
Please let me know if
Thank you so much.
So DHS is devised of these categories of spaces. So we have single male, female shelters for men and women divided by gender. Stabilization or safe haven beds, which we will also talk about later, which are for clients for whom those single adult shelters are not a possibility, which can be for a variety of reasons, safety being primary among them. Stabilization and safe haven beds, as I said, we will discuss later, but they have their own application system and are a little bit more flexible in terms of entry requirements. They're easier to get into and they're a little easier to stay in for folks who are closer to a street level living style. Adult family shelters, which would be adult families without children, minor children, have their own intake site. And then there are those for families with minor children. And again, we will discuss these more in detail. Now, the HERCs and the other emergency shelter systems that I labeled prior are a result of the alleged capacity crisis, as Eric Adams has framed it. Initially, the city was treating immigrant shelter applicants as indistinguishable from other shelter applicants. The DHS system was the space primarily within which anyone who requested shelter was placed within. In September of 22, we have the creation of this new shelter system as a response to the quote unquote crisis of capacity. The city decided they didn't have enough room in the DHS spaces such that they had to create these auxiliary emergency spaces. The result of that creation is a two-tier system where the division is based on national origin and date of entry. That's the only distinguishing, if you were here before March 15, 2022, you have access to DHS. If you weren't and come from another country, you no longer do. These spaces are created under emergency powers and are therefore thought of as the city as not having to comply with the responsibilities and mandates imposed by the Callahan Consent Decree, which is the consent decree from which we get our right to shelter in New York City. So as I say, these spaces are outside of the DHS system. HERCs are run by HPD and Health and Hospitals. Respite centers are run by the Office of Emergency Management and HPD. And as we've said, the city is choosing, we think of this as a choice, to interpret these spaces as falling outside their protections and services mandated for the other shelters that predated them. Our clients report really inadequate conditions within the HERCs. And these have been variable. There's been some abatement. I would say that they are still bad. There is a lot of difficulty enrolling children in school, not minimal access to medical care. Caseworkers are few and far between. Often they aren't serving hot food. City FEPS, which is a housing voucher program that we will also discuss later on in this presentation, are not issuing from inside non-DHS or those other predating shelter spaces within the city. So the HERCs, you cannot get a city FEPS voucher currently from within a HERC system. Similarly, and this is a little bit more flexible, but on paper, this population should not have access to safe havens and stabilization beds. We have had some limited success getting folks into these spaces, but on paper, they're not supposed to be accessible for recent immigrants. Again, post March 15, 2022. So here we go. First question, when did the person that you're interacting with arrive? If they arrived pre-March 15, 2022, go to DHS. They can access the shelter system as someone who was born in the States or as someone who's been here for a very long time could. If not, they must go through, if they entered after March 15, 22, they must go through the HERC respite system. Okay. So capacity crisis on top of capacity crisis, the city comes out with what I'm sure many of you have heard, these 30 and 60-day notices. So not only do we need emergency spaces for recently arrived immigrants, but we need to curtail the amount of time that they can feel safe and comfortable. 30 single adults arriving at a HERC placement are, as far as last we've heard, shown a notice on an iPad, which asks that they click through to acknowledge that they've been put on notice of their 30-day limitation. Now, this raises a lot of first-year law school questions, concerns, red flags. It's our understanding that these are not being provided in everyone's native language. We have serious concerns about the sufficiency of that notice, whether it's actually the case that folks are understanding what they're being told. One of many parts of this system that's broken. And if you are a recent immigrant family with children, instead of 30 days, you're given 60 days. Okay. So if you're interacting with a client who's a new immigrant post March 15, 22, has never been in shelter before in New York City, they should go to the Roosevelt Hotel, which is at 45 East 45. If they are a single adult or an adult family, they should get a 30-day placement. Families with minor children will get a 60-day placement. Now, these are the types of things that are ever changing. So at this moment, our understanding is that families are getting 60-day placements. Maybe Deb wants to jump in here, but it is also our understanding that for 30-day placements, they are not always being given. Is that right?
No, that's not exactly right. People are getting initial 30-day placements. So single adults and adult families are getting initial 30-day placements. But when their placement is finished, and I think you're going to talk about that in a little while, there's a gap between when their first 30-day placement finishes and their next one begins.
Okay. And is there some suggestion that some folks might not even be given a second 30-day placement?
So currently, the city has said that people, if they don't accept, well, let's deal with that when we deal with it.
Okay. Thank you. And here we are. After 30 days, most single adults will have to leave their HERC placement. When that happens, this is something where information is quite powerful. There's a lot of we interact with a lot of folks who don't seem to have had the system explained very well to them. At the expiration of their 30 days, they must go to the reticketing center, whose address we will have on, I think, the next slide, where they will be presented with options. The reticketing refers to probably the first option that they will be presented with, which is a ticket out of the city. Basically, where would you like to go? And we'll send you there. It is the case that if they do not want to leave, and most of the folks that we talk to don't want to leave, they can ask to be put on a waiting list for a new placement. Here is the address for the reticketing center in the East Village on 7th Street, over on the Alphabet side. People there, like I said, will be given the option between a ticket out or being put on a wait list. They can request a new cot assignment. If no cot is available at that moment, which we understand it will not be immediately, that person will be added to the wait list and will keep their place in line until a cot is available. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't have to come back. They need to come back to check in for their place, to see where their place in the line has, whether they've progressed through the line and whether or not that placement has been provided to them. Now, that is not a location that folks can stay at indoors overnight. That reticketing center closes at 7 p.m. And then there is a waiting area conveniently located all the way up in the Bronx, where they can spend the night and will likely have to sleep on the floor before they return to the reticketing center to check for their progress in the assignment process. Deb, is this a convenient place to add a little?
Sure, I'm sorry, what was the question?
Well, the question is just, is it the case, we have heard from clients that they have waited, what, up to 10, 12 days for a
I
new
had a
assignment?
client yesterday that waited 12 days between the time that they left their first 30-day placement and were accepted into their second 30-day placement. They were given a number, and every day they would go to the St. Bridget's reticketing center and wait for their number to be called. And after 12 days, they were given a new assignment, a new 30-day assignment. So although I've heard it's 5 days now, that's
What the city's saying.
yeah. And there are some notes in the chat. People are saying that some of the questions are, how do they get from East 7th Street to Bathgate? They're given a Metro card. That's how they get from East 7th Street to Bathgate. Then yes, that's it.
Okay, thank you.
Anytime.
So families with children at their 60-day time do not go to the reticketing center. They return to the Roosevelt Hotel, where they will be similarly, I think, initially presented with the option of leaving. And maybe not so much an option, but like the suggested, like there may well be a little bit push towards that. But they can also request a new placement for another 60 days. And those have been, we have only just started to see, I think 2 weeks ago, excuse me, was the first set of 60-day expirations. So far, at least, my understanding is that families have been more quickly placed into new placements. But as the number of those 60-day notices coming to date increases, we wait to see how the city will be able to manage that. Okay, Floyd Bennett Field in the news a lot. Part of the city's many varied attempts to respond to this moment. The conditions are rough out there, especially when the weather is bad, when the wind blows. It's pretty far out. There is an intake site on site. There is cafeteria, bathroom, and shower trailers separate from the main tent. They are provided with transportation to Stillwell Avenue, which then from there is another very long commute to work or school. What about the right to shelter? Well, it's a good question. The city is currently in court challenging this mandate, and I think we would say from the perspective of the clients that we have in this HERC system, that right to shelter doesn't exist anymore.
What I would say is that the new immigrants are not being given the benefit of right to shelter.
New immigrants are not being given the benefit of right to shelter. Here is a flyer that has been distributed at the border, seeking to dissuade folks from choosing New York City as their final destination. I think that largely speaks for itself. So for folks within the emergency HERC system, what can we do? So the thing that we are doing most is requesting reasonable accommodations based on the presence of disability. And if it's a family, that can be based on a disability in any member of the family. In order to submit that request, we need some amount of proof of disability, which is complicated by the fact that folks lose documentation that they may have left home with during transit. Folks often haven't had time to set up relationships with doctors in the 30 or 60 days that they've been given. It's also complicated by an ever-changing system. But But we have had success in extending the length of times that families and individuals have to stay in their HERC placements. And the way that that works is if it's a single adult who was originally given 30 days, when we get them extensions based on a reasonable accommodation for disability, they're given subsequent 30-day chunks, and one at a time. Okay, so jumping back to DHS shelters, this suggests no eligibility process except for I'm sorry, Deb.
No, I just wanted to add, so we're going to go through traditional DHS shelter too rather briefly, but immigrants who entered the country before March 15th, 2022 will still enter this type of shelter. So
Still have access. Yeah. So, but that's the eligibility criteria. If they arrived post March 15, 2022, they do not have access to the system. There is an intake process required of this system, but folks who meet that eligibility requirement and go through intake will be given a shelter assignment. Most of this system is dorm style. And as I hinted at before, many of our clients will not enter this setting. Here are the intake locations for single adults. The men apply on 30th Street in Manhattan. For women, there are two, one in the Bronx and one in Brooklyn. Any client that you interact with who's been in a DHS shelter in the last 12 months, their placement has been held for them and they should return to the same shelter unless they have a reason for which they cannot, in which case we would do a safety transfer for them. So for those who are not able to enter traditional adult DHS shelters, safe haven and stabilization beds operate still within the DHS system, but are a system tailored to be more acceptable for those folks. Low threshold, more private system, less rules and regulations. There's no curfew at these sites. Folks can enter at any time. They hold their beds for 48 hours. So if they leave the shelter for up to 48 hours, they can come back and still maintain their beds. Stabilization beds are safe haven beds, but in hotels. They typically have less tandem services provided at a stabilization bed site than at a safe haven.
And it's now not only in hotels, there are other stabilization sites. It was that way for a while. And sorry, this is, I let this one slide through.
Well, as we keep saying, the system's changing constantly. So that excuses us. Okay. AFIC eligibility. What is an adult family? Good question. So this list without minor children. So typically what we're seeing is applicants with marriage certificate or domestic partnership certificate. 2 or more adults can show family relationships, can show caretaking, emotionally or physically supportive relationships, aunt or uncle, grandparent to grandchild, parent to child or stepchild, even siblings. But remember, these are for folks who don't qualify as minors, right? So if it was a grandparent with a minor child, that would be through PATH, Deb? Yeah.
Yeah, and in this context, it's people under the age of 21.
Great.
They would go, if there's someone in the home under the age of 21, they'll go to PATH.
Right. So they also must be able to verify that their household meets one of those criteria listed, and that they have resided with one another for 180 days within the immediately prior year. That is also on 30th Street, 430 East 30th Street, same as male intake. Okay, PATH, family with minor children. Okay, so like Deb said, any families with children younger than 21, a pregnant woman is considered a family, and families inclusive of a pregnant woman.
And I should have said
it is
pregnant
also
person. Pregnant person.
of course. Thank you. I'm giving it, so I'll take the blame for that. Pregnant person. It is also the case that there be some, if the child is in common, you do not have to prove marriage or domestic partnership, but you would have to prove that both are parents in like a legal sense. Could be adopted as well, but it can't just be a couple that's co-parenting a child. Okay, and that is in the Bronx, 151 East, 151. We've got a lot of number repetition. That's nice for memory. 151 East, 151. Okay, so in addition to those eligibility requirements, there's also an eligibility requirement of providing complete housing history. So for AFIC, for adult families, they must go back 1 year. For PATH, for families with minor children, must go back 2 years of housing history. That means everything. That even means street homelessness. And it requires a point of contact for each such that they can be verified. This has been a long problem that Deb has really taken on and has been seeing success with. So, like, thank you, Deb. Historically, we have been seeing clients deemed ineligible for shelter because one or more of those housing contacts don't cooperate, don't answer the phone, don't give sufficient information for DHS to confirm. Everything that I've listed there would be totally outside of the person applying for shelter's control, right? And it's based on this theory of a person who's like trying to game the system, right? Who's showing up for a homeless shelter intake just to like, as if they would be choosing to do that if they had somewhere else they could go. So this has been a cyclical problem wherein folks historically have had to continuously return to intake to every 10 days, waiting for a temporary shelter placement while they investigate these housing histories. And it can go on and on and on. We have seen some progress recently in DHS's at least internal interpretation of their policies and in retraining. So hopefully we're going to see this less as an issue thanks to Deb's advocacy, but this is a flavor of the systems we operate within. Okay, a quick, please, Deb.
I appreciate you very much, but a lot of people's advocacy, a lot of people, a lot of different groups' advocacy. But thank you, Graham.
You're welcome. Okay, a quick word about NOVA. NOVA preclusions no violence anymore. It's a screen for domestic violence. So what can happen is that families who are alleged to have experienced domestic violence, and that can be like very essential protection. It can also be an overheard argument that gets that moves through the system in such a way that this NOVA preclusion gets applied to a family. It means once it's applied, the two members of the household are no longer allowed to live together in shelter. Like I said, can be very important protection for folks. Can also be wrong, or we have clients who want them to be overturned. And they are very, very difficult to overturn. Okay. Shifting again, and I see the chat is enormous. I really appreciate you all waiting for the end for questions. We're going to talk about some public benefit eligibility for immigrants. Okay. Public assistance, cash assistance. They refer to the same thing. Cash assistance includes family assistance, which is federal. safety net assistance, which is state. They have different eligibility requirements. Typically in this context, it's going to be state safety net that is more accessible for our clients. Okay, PRU-call, permanently residing under color of law. This is not an official immigration status. It's a collection of different statuses that are held together for certain types of benefit applications or eligibilities. So, and there are actually different definitions of the PRU-call standard in different agencies. So, DOH, Department of Health, Department of Labor, and OTDA, Office of Temporary Disability Assistance, have different definitions. OTDA is the one that we work within. And again, another space where definitions are changing. Previously, most of those who qualified as PRU-call were not in application status, except for those who had applied for asylum but already had work authorization. Fortunately, in May of 23, the OTDA definition of PRU-call was expanded, and that 23 TA DC 039, that's the coded the policy announcement from OTDA, expands the definition of PRU-call for the following categories. It's a rather long list. Those at the top are the ones that we're seeing the most. Mostly we're dealing with folks who have applied for asylum, and that does not require any longer that they already have work authorization. That's what EAD is. So with or without EAD, applicants for TPS, temporary protected status, also within PRU-call. DACA, we're not seeing applicants for anymore. SIJ is special immigrant juvenile status. We don't interact with a lot of those cases, but some. My understanding is these slides are going to be shared with attendants afterwards, so I'm not going to go through each and every one of these. But they are, some of them more obvious than others, some of them a little more in the weeds. The last one here is applicants for special visas, K visas, S, T, U, and V are all included within PRU-call. So a note about public charge, which is in the back of our minds as we work with folks in accessing benefits. Public charge is a the question asked under public charge is asked at the point of further along in the application process for immigration status, and it asks whether this person or this family is expected to be a burden on the public assistance structure of the city or state. So it's assessing which benefits they have had access to in the past as a way of trying to guess about what they will require in the future. So in 2019, the rule was worse than it is now. The standard of analysis was a more likely than not standard. It's now, as you can see in the language at the bottom, more of a totality of the circumstances standard, a slightly better standard of analysis, but still the question here is prospectively, what do we expect this person or family to require from the government in the future? Okay. SNAP, food stamps, food assistance. We're going to talk about public assistance, cash assistance standards in a moment. SNAPs are more strict. It's a federal benefit, and the qualifying statuses include U.S. citizen, lawful permanent resident who has been here for 5 years with that status. That LPR status can be cut short if the folks have been paying for 40 quarters of Social Security tax, 10 years, and they get lawful permanent resident status near the end of that 10 years, only the 10 years would then have to run. They wouldn't have to wait an additional 5 years. Importantly, SNAP covers minor children. And I think the cutoff there is 18. Anyone under 18 qualifies for SNAP. And those who have been granted, Deb, please.
That's not correct. It's
Okay,
people under 18 who are lawful permanent residents can bypass the 5-year ban.
Even not even Pru-Call kids?
No kids who are Pru-Call are eligible for SNAP unless they're otherwise eligible.
What I'm thinking of is families that we've worked with who've had their kids born here, who are of course then
Everyone
US
who's born
citizens
here is
and then-
entitled
yes.
to everything.
Yes,
But
yes.
also Medicaid, everyone is entitled, every person under the age of 18 in New York State is eligible for Medicaid.
Yes, we're going to get to that too. And anyone who has been granted refugee or asylum status can also qualify for. Thank you for that, for catching that. Okay, right. And at the bottom here, we're about to go into this more, but asylum applicants and temporary protected status applicants are eligible for public assistance, cash assistance, but not for SNAP. Medicaid eligibility, as Deb just said, under federal Medicaid, you can get for pregnant persons and newly postpartum persons. But most of our Medicaid eligibility is going through state Medicaid. Call under the Department of Health's definition, different from OTA does. And all children under 18 are qualifying for state Medicaid. Okay, I guess we didn't have a slide on cash assistance. Apologies for that. But people with the
Pru-Call standard, the
Yes.
expanded Pru-Call standard is cash assistance. That's what cash assistance.
Exactly.
Right.
Okay, so now a bit about shelter choice vouchers. Okay, so only admittance, the housing vouchers are only issuing from within DHS or HRA shelters. Now, a quick note about the difference between a public and a private shelter. A private shelter is, by which we mean most churches that are allowing folks to sleep in their basement would be considered a private shelter. The Bowery Mission would be a private shelter. Basically anything with mission in its title. These are spaces that are not tied into the city. So there are a lot of shelters that are run by nonprofits or private organizations, but that are functionally public shelters because the city controls access and placement within them. Private shelters may be preferable for recently arrived folks because they don't have the same 30 and 60-day eviction policies. And they're also not tied into the system such that they don't work with cops, for example. Okay, vouchers that are available within DHS. We've mentioned City FEPS a lot, so I'm going to start there. That's a rental assistance supplement. Helps find and keep housing. City FEPS is available to some who are at risk of eviction and to some people within. I'm so sorry. I've put up. Oh, never mind. Excuse me. Forget that. I edited it a different way. It used to be the case that you had to be in shelter for 90 days before you could use a City FEPS voucher. That is no longer the law. It is now the case that functionally they could issue immediately upon entering shelter, but there is typically more delay than that. HPD Section 8, run through the HPD agency. Federal funding, subsidies for low-income families. Families pay a share of their income toward rent, and the subsidy paid directly to the landlord makes up the difference. Okay, that was very quick. That was a lot of information. I see 39 questions in the chat or comments of some sort. How would we like to, Nipa, go about this?
I've actually been answering the questions, and Josh has also been chiming in. Thank you,
Amazing.
Josh, when we don't know the answers. Are there any questions that have been in the chat that we haven't answered? I think that is, oh,
So it might be helpful to go over some of the major ones, just so that everybody gets information in case some people are joining over the phone. Is that okay?
Sure,
yes.
Okay.
please.
So let's see. A lot of it's comments at the horror of the situation, which is,
Yes.
yes, definitely. What happens if a family accepts to be relocated out of New York City when visiting a reticketing center? Say Albany, for example. Where are they housed then?
Do you want that, Graham?
Well, I mean, I think I don't have the answer to it in the sense that I don't know what exists in Albany, but my understanding is that they're sent to Albany, and then it's Albany's. Then it's a question for Albany of what,
And people get a ticket. They don't get a housing plan.
right, exactly. They're just,
So maybe there's a shelter system in Albany, and maybe there's not.
So this talking more towards New York City, if the code blue, if a person is awaiting a placement on 7th Street, but it is a code blue, is there a safe place to sleep?
So they give out a list of churches, which Josh put into the chat, and I'll put it back in the chat. Thank you, Josh. All right, from Josh. So the St. Bridget's Reticketing Center does hand out a list of churches. And so people can sleep on the floor of those churches if there's room. But sometimes there's not room. I mean, unofficially, I tell people to go to Penn Station. That's where I send people unofficially. The Bathgate Center, people can stay in the Bathgate Center in the Bronx. And that's like the official waiting room.
right.
But they and people sleep on the floor there as well.
And then somebody said, I thought the Help Women's Intake Center was no longer an intake site and intake was only being provided at Franklin.
It's
My
back.
understanding is that it's reopened as an intake site.
Okay. Housing voucher choices are available again. I was told by Homebase a couple of months ago that those vouchers were frozen. Is this still true?
That may be. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it's that's true.
Okay. And I think this was in relation to the public benefits. So to clarify, they can apply for PA, but not for SNAP. But I'm
If-
not sure. Yeah.
Right. If they have anyone in the family who was born in the United States, they could apply for SNAP for them. Or if
Okay. I'm sorry, Graham.
no, go ahead.
No, they can apply for anything. Anyone can apply for any
That's what I was
benefit
gonna
at
say.
any time.
Right.
But they're not eligible for SNAP unless they have a separate status.
And then somebody mentioned that with an asylum receipt, they can apply for cash assistance and Medicaid, not SNAP. We just want to verify if this is correct.
If someone has been granted asylum, they should qualify for SNAP.
Okay.
If they're an asylum applicant, not yet.
So I think what they're talking about is the receipt that the application has been received.
Right. Okay. A stamped 797 is not enough for SNAP.
But it's enough for everything else.
Exactly.
Okay. And then somebody asked, can you please clarify where new immigrants should go if they don't have a placement? Is it Roosevelt Hotel?
If they are a family with children, the Roosevelt Hotel is the place that they should go at the expiration of their 60 days. If they are a single adult or an adult family, it's the reticketing center on 7th Street.
If they have already had a placement given to them.
Right. Okay. Correct. If it's a new place, if they've never been placed as a single adult or adult family, it's also the Roosevelt. Correct? Deb, yes.
Okay. Are clients in HERRCs not permitted to apply for FHEPS? I have heard conflicting reports whether HERRC clients are unable to apply even if they meet other criteria, such as having an open cash assistance case.
Um,
I think I should take this
Yeah.
one if that's okay, Graham,
Yes.
because FEPS, I want to talk about the difference between FEPS and city FEPS. FEPS is a housing subsidy that's for people who are in eviction. So it's an eviction prevention, and then you can get a certain type of FEPS to move, but it's for people who have been evicted within the last year or are facing eviction. So it's somewhat unlikely at this point that new immigrants who got here after March of 2022 are being evicted. And would end up going to the HERCs. That's not a likely scenario. If you're talking about city FEPS, which is a different subsidy, no. Living in a HERC does not make somebody eligible for city FEPS, but being in a DHS shelter does. There are other criteria, but a big part of it is residence in a DHS shelter.
Okay. After people are relocated, reticketed out of New York City, what are the barriers to re-entering the city shelter system?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I don't know. I would say I'm not even sure that that's been tested. Yeah,
I have clients who have left and come back.
really? Okay,
Yeah.
great. And been given placement again?
Yes,
Great.
but they have to wait after they have to like get their number from the reticketing center and wait.
But it's as if they hadn't chosen the reticketing when they return. It's as if they then just go on the waiting list.
Right. It's as if they've chosen reticketing.
Great.
Okay, so I think it's been answered, but I'll ask, can immigrants try to go through the traditional shelter systems like the 30th Street Men's Shelter, or will they be turned away?
They again, they could try. I would say that if they arrived after March 15 of 22 and the city is, I don't want to say they should be turned away. If it's following its own policies, they will be turned away.
Okay. What do you need for cash assistance as an asylum seeker? Do you have to wait 3 months for the receipt? Does a stamped copy by the court of I-589 sufficient to apply for cash assistance?
589, that's work authorization, isn't it?
You need as far as it has nothing to do with work authorization
Right.
anymore. Right now, it's
994.
just applying for asylum. So if once you have a stamped copy that you've submitted your asylum application, you're eligible for public benefits. I also want to say something about DHS. There are many new immigrants that are in DHS shelter. They just are not allowed to present at DHS intake sites. Many new immigrants are in shelter. They are put into shelter from the Roosevelt Hotel.
Right.
Is the shelter requirement for city FEPS waived entirely, or is it just that there's no longer a minimum length of stay?
No longer a minimum length of stay.
And then somebody asks, what is the difference between HERCS, HERCS, and other shelters?
Well, the HERCs exist outside of the other shelter systems. So they are, I imagine that there is a range of quality within the HERC system, but the city is not held to the same, is not holding itself to all of the same requirements and regulations within the HERC system, as I understand it, such that like perhaps their beds could be closer together than they are in DHS shelter. Perhaps instead of, there are I think more variation within the HERC system
Okay.
because of their emergency nature.
And then we are at 3 o'clock, but I will ask one last question. please clarify what you said, that reticketing is not a housing plan. What does reticketing do if no guarantee of housing?
Makes them someone else's problem.
Okay. So we are at the end of the workshop. So thank you so much, Deb and Graham. This training was very informative, especially with the recent changes, you know. I think we all got a little bit more clarification as to how to assist our clients. But thank you so much. And we will be posting these slides, and the training will be on our YouTube and our website. So we guys can have like a copy of it. So thank you, everyone,
Amazing.
and have a great day.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us, everybody. And thanks to Josh for answering some questions.
Thank you, Josh.
Definitely. Thank you, Josh. And we will post our website and also the link to where you can view the training on the chat. And yes, somebody said thank you, Nylag. So on top of thanking you guys personally, thank you, Nylag.
Thank you.
You're welcome on their behalf.
Yes. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Yeah.